and happy April. Today is the first day of a new month, and interestingly enough, April comes from the Latin word aperire, which means to open, a lot like the flowers that are opening now that it's springtime. Today we are going to learn a little bit about an artist named Georgia O'Keeffe, and we are going to make a flower painting. Jordy really wants to be in this video. So Georgia O'Keeffe was an American artist. She was born in 1887 and she died in 1986. She was born and raised on a farm in Wisconsin, but she actually ended up making a trip out to New Mexico and fell in love with the landscape there and moved to New Mexico. A lot of her artwork that she is famous for was inspired by the surroundings that she saw in New Mexico. So she's famous for the landscape paintings that she made while living there, and also really famous for her large flowers. I'll show you some of my favorite images by her and a picture of her so you can see what she looked like. But she would take flowers from her surroundings and she would kind of zoom in on them or enlarge them and paint them covering the entire canvas. So we are going to practice looking at some flowers from life. With the nice weather, it's a perfect opportunity to get outside and maybe pick some flowers from your yard, or if you've been going on a walk with your family, you can maybe pick some flowers that you see on your walk. And then at the end of this video, I will also show you how to make a flower crown out of the flowers that you are drawing and painting. So you can see I've got a little vase here that has a bunch of little flowers inside of it. These are actually just weeds that I found out in my yard. Hello. But they are what I decided to study and observe for my artwork. So the supplies that you're going to need for today's lesson are a little bit different from our traditional art supplies. Don't worry about paint or a paintbrush. We are actually going to learn how to make paint using washable markers. So I have two different colors. You want to think about what colors look good together. The ones that are maybe next to each other on the color wheel, or colors that mix well together. I'll talk about that a little bit later. You'll also need a plastic sandwich bag, a bottle of water, a spray bottle. If you don't have this, you can always just use a cup of water and your fingers to sprinkle some water on. You'll also need a piece of paper that's cut down to about the same size as your bag. So I don't know if you can tell, but this should fit just under my sandwich bag. You'll need a pencil to draw with, a Sharpie, which is optional, and a white crayon is also optional. Oh, and your flowers, of course, that you are going to be looking at while we draw. And I also have a little strip of extra paper just to test out my colors beforehand so I can see what they're going to look like before I go ahead and paint my actual project. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started on the art making part. I'll show you up close so you can follow along now that you've got all of your supplies.
So whenever you're drawing something from life or from observation, the most important thing that you need to remember is to slow down and to actually look at the thing that you're going to be drawing. So I've got a couple of my flowers in this little vase. And as I'm drawing, I'm going to do my best to actually look at the shape of all of the petals. The cool thing about flowers is that they grow out in nature. They're not made in a factory. So they have these wobbly, wavy shapes and lines that make them. And it doesn't have to be perfect because it's not something that's made in a factory or manufactured. It doesn't have these perfect edges. So it's okay if your lines are kind of wobbly and wild. It'll look a lot more natural and a lot more like Georgia O'Keeffe's paintings. So I'm going to look at this flower here. I like the way that the petals have opened up since it's been sitting in my vase. So the main thing I want to challenge you to do is to try and use the entire paper and do your best to make your petals touch all four sides. If you look at Georgia O'Keeffe's work, her flowers were zoomed in or they were really, really big all across her paper. So I'm just gonna go for it. I like to say to draw light until you get it right. So I'm gonna sketch with my pencil. I'm not gonna push down really hard on the paper. So I'm gonna start over here and I'm just gonna look up at this top petal right here, and it looks like the line just kind of goes all over the place. So I'm gonna do my best to make my pencil move up, across, and then back down for my first kind of petal shape. Now you can see they all sort of overlap. If you look at this one too, you can see that they are touching each other and covering the last one or the one next to it. So I'm gonna start with my next petal over here and do the same kind of thing. Moving. This one looks like it goes in a little bit and before it goes back towards the center. And this one right here, move my pencil around a little bit. It's not gonna look exactly like it, but that's okay. Really, you have plenty of time. You can go really slow and you can make this look super realistic or just like the flower that you see. But I want to try and cover my paper, so I've touched almost every single side, filling the whole entire space. Now I'm gonna go towards the center, and if you look, I don't know if you can see up close, it's got all of these little things here, which hold the pollen for the bees to come and collect. So it looks like they're just these long kind of wild shapes like that. They go around the center. And in the middle is like this little green shape, sort of like a light green shape. On one of this flower right here, you can see it a little bit better. Looks almost a little bit spiky. Okay. I might add a couple lines on my petals. It looks like they've got a little bit of texture. Ta-da! There's my flower. It's pretty good. So you can outline it with your Sharpie after this so that the lines stand out. Or if you wanted to, you could just leave it in pencil. Maybe go over your lines a little bit darker with your pencil now that you've got your actual drawing finished. I'm gonna go ahead and outline mine in Sharpie really quickly so you can see what that looks like. So I went ahead and outlined my flower with Sharpie. Like I said, if you wanted to keep it looking a little bit more natural, you could just leave it with the pencil drawing and maybe go over your pencil lines a little bit darker so it stands out once you've got that paint effect on there. The next step is going to take a white crayon, and this is just going to act as a barrier to prevent the paint from kind of spreading all over the place. You can't really see it very well, so you gotta kind of just go slow and do your best to remember where you last drew. But I'm just going to go just outside of the Sharpie, almost like around the flower to create a little bit of a wall. The wax in the crayon is going to prevent the paint from spreading everywhere because the water will separate from the wax. So I'll go ahead and show you that really quickly, and then we'll get started on painting. Okay, my flower is ready to be painted. So this is the fun part. You can kind of experiment a little bit with your colors beforehand if you like. I actually made a little test strip using my orange and yellow because I wanted to see how it would look when the two blend together. Now I know that these two colors are going to look good when they mix because they are next to each other on the color wheel. And some of you might remember that we've got our three primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. And when you mix red and yellow together, they make orange. So these two colors have a good relationship. It means they'll look really nice when they mix together. Now you could use whatever colors you like, or you could experiment with a couple different colors, but I chose to limit it just to two so that it's not going too crazy. You could pick two colors that are next to each other on the color wheel like I did, or just kind of see what happens. So this is my little test strip. I'm gonna set this off to the side. You're gonna need your plastic bag, and your bag should fit just over your paper that you've cut. It might not be perfect, but that's okay. We don't really need this little bit here at the end, so I cut my paper beforehand so that it fits in that little window. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab my orange and yellow markers. I'm gonna set my bag over my paper just so I can get kind of like a guideline of where I wanna do the coloring. And I'm actually gonna flip this way. There's a little rip in the bag. There we go. Just so I can see kind of where I wanna do the coloring. So I'm gonna start with yellow. I like to start with the lightest color first. You can see that I've already gotten a little bit of orange mixed in with my yellow marker, but that's okay. I'm gonna do my best to stay inside the lines. That was my dog Birdie. She's saying hello. But I'm not gonna get too worried about making it look super neat. I mostly just wanna try and stay as close the inside as I can and just sort of go for it with my marker. So I'm coloring my flower to look like the flower that I picked from outside because I wanted to draw from life, just like Georgia O'Keeffe. So I'm just gonna start with this yellow because that's the color I see the most. But if you look in the shadows or the places that are a little bit darker, you can see some other colors. There's some green in here actually, which could be kind of cool if you wanted to use green. But I'm gonna stick with my orange and I'm gonna color these little sections here with some orange. I'm just kind of moving quickly. Doesn't have to be perfect because our colors are going to kind of move and blend a little bit. As I'm coloring, I'm trying to hold the bag in place. I'm gonna go back over with my yellow, kind of over top of the orange a little bit so you can see what happens when they mix together. That looks so cool already. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and say that this is ready. And what I'm gonna do is take my paper and carefully slide it out of the way. I don't want it to get too wet. And then I'm gonna grab my spray bottle, just has some water inside of it. And I'm only going to spray this one time. If you spray it more than once, you're gonna have a lot of water running all over the place. It'll still look really cool, but your colors are going to mix together a lot more, and you're not gonna have this kind of like subtle blending. So I'm gonna take my spray bottle, I'm gonna point it towards the middle of my bag, and I'm just gonna go for it. Woo! All right, done. I'm really tempted to spray again, but I'm not gonna do it. We'll see what happens. And then I'm gonna take my drawing and I'm going to flip it around, whoop, like that. Make sure that it lines up with the bag. And I'm going to press it down. Now I wanna see what's happening and kind of move the colors around a little bit. So I'm gonna take it very carefully and flip it over. Whoa! All right, so I'm gonna take my finger now and sort of push the color around. As you can see, these spots right here are areas where I didn't really get enough water. I was so tempted to spray it. So what you could do if you want is you could lift this really carefully and you could definitely spray it again, either on the bag or on your paper. Wow. Now I've got lots of water. So I'm gonna put it back down again, and you can see just that little bit of water is going to create more paint for you to work with. So you can take your finger and sort of push it around until it touches the areas that you want it to, or you can just let it be. I want more of my flower to be covered with paint than the background, so I'm gonna try and carefully push this around like that. Now this is definitely going to be a little bit less controlled than when you paint with a paintbrush, but that's okay. Georgia O'Keeffe's paintings were pretty abstract themselves, and I think I like the effect of it just kind of scattered all over. So that looks pretty good to me. I'm gonna go ahead and carefully lift the bag up. Whoa, that looks awesome. So you can see some of the paint got over here. If you didn't want any paint in your background, you could do more coloring with your white crayon. You could actually see a little bit right there how the white crayon prevented the paint from sticking in that spot. And same with right here. So you could color your whole background white if you wanted to. I don't mind the way that this looks. I think it looks pretty cool as it is. One of my previous attempts, I'll show you my other one. You can see the paint or the marker was a little bit more controlled, so it only came off in this spot right here. So you could try this a couple different times. You could draw your flower after it's been sitting for a little while. These guys have been in this little vase for about an hour, and these have opened up a lot more than when I first picked them this morning. This one is still really closed. So you could do your flower at different times of day. Or you could, you know, kind of just experiment with a different flower, a different shape, or even different colors.
So hopefully you enjoyed drawing from life and painting your Georgia O'Keeffe inspired flower. Stick around for my other activity, which is making a flower crown out of all the flowers you've picked. And I'm also going to include under the video a recipe that was written by Georgia O'Keeffe herself for brownies. She, in her later years, especially as she was losing her eyesight, really enjoyed cooking and baking, and she grew a lot of her own ingredients. So there is a cookbook out there with all of her own recipes for tons and tons of different things. So if you're interested in one more Georgia O'Keeffe inspired activity, you can make your own brownies based off of her personal recipe. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy. So to make your flower crown, you need to make sure you have plenty of flowers picked out. When you pick them out, make sure you go as far down the stem as possible so that you can have the full length of the stem. This part up here is going to be a lot harder to work with. the thicker part on the end is what we're mostly going to be focusing on. You can remove some of this extra stuff if you want to, or you can leave it on there. I like to leave some of it on because it makes the crown look a little bit fuller when you put it on your head. So you can either use your fingernail, you can use the toothpick that you might have used for your clay beads, if you saw that video, or anything that's kind of small and sort of sharp. You want to be able to create a tiny incision or a little cut on the stem, and we're going to be kind of threading each stem through that. So the way that looks is you're going to go ahead and pick your first flower. Gonna just go ahead and use this guy. And you don't want to start too close to the end or it could split and then your crown's gonna fall apart. But maybe an inch away from the end, and I use like this part of my thumb to measure out about an inch, like that. You don't have to do that, you can just guess. But about an inch away from the end, you are going to create a little cut through the middle of your stem. So it's kind of hard to see, but I'm just poking all the way through right there, and I'm trying to be really careful not to break it apart. I'm basically creating a space that's big enough for my next stem to go through. So you can kind of see that little spot right there. I'm gonna take my next flower and I am going to super carefully thread it through that little space that I just created. So this part can be a little tricky, especially if you have like a really thick stem that you're trying to get through there. You can see that I have gotten it through, and I'm going to pull. I've got some extra leaves on here, so I need to be really careful not to pull too hard or it's going to split the entire stem. But I'm gonna just pull gently, and eventually your flower is going to either stop it from being pulled any farther, or you can stop a little earlier if you want. Like there's a little bud on here. I could technically stop pulling right there, but I'm just gonna see if I can. Here we go. So this flower here is going to stop it from going any further. Now you can see already this is pretty long. So if you wanted to make your flower crown more full of flowers, then you would definitely cut these stems a little bit shorter. So for example, this one's a little bit smaller. I'm gonna break that part off even more. Now that I've made it shorter, it's a lot easier to kind of make a mistake and rip through this. So you have to be really careful, and you don't have as much width to work with because it's a little bit skinnier up here. But I'm gonna take a shorter flower than the first two that I used, and I'm going to thread that through, carefully pull, and then stop. So then what you would do next is go on to that second flower that you just threaded through and create another little incision or cut. It's a good vocab word for you. And keep threading your flowers until you're gonna end up with like a little chain. So it's starting to grow. I'm gonna go ahead and add a couple more and speed through it a little bit so you can see what it's like when it's all finally finished. So I've got a long chain of flowers that I've just made, You might have been able to tell from the video, there were a couple of times where I had some trouble, but as I was going, I was kind of placing it around my head to kind of measure and see if the ends were able to connect. So you can see right now, this is definitely long enough. So the last kind of step that you want to do is carefully place it around your head where you want it to sit, like this. And kind of keep your fingers on that spot where the pieces or the ends connect or where they touch. And then you're just going to really carefully tie it together right there. So I'm gonna cross the two pieces and wrap this around. And then I'm gonna make a loop, just like you're kind of like tying a knot in your shoe. And then super, super carefully, you're going to pull both of them just like a string until it creates a knot. You don't want to pull too hard or it's all gonna come apart. And then you can see how it looks.